Have you ever noticed how some people seem perfectly fine alone? How they appear untouchable, like they don't need anyone at all? And yet, behind that mask of independence, there's a quiet ache they can't quite shake. Right now, at this very moment, they are lonely. More than they ever let on. They may not text, call, or reach out, but the emptiness is there, gnawing quietly in places no one else sees. And here's the twist, they don't realize something essential about you. Something that, if they did, would make them see the world in a completely different light. But, for now, all they have is a gnawing silent longing, and the realization of what they lost hasn't fully reached them yet. You've probably felt this in your own interactions, the subtle gap between what they show and what they hide, and it's more powerful than you think. Being around someone like this, you learn quickly that appearances can be deceiving. They walk through life with this aura of self-sufficiency, like they're perfectly capable of handling anything on their own. At first glance, it's admirable, even magnetic. There's a confidence in their solitude, a certain calm in their detachment, and it's easy to mistake it for strength. But strength is one thing, isolation is another. Underneath all that independence, there's a vulnerability they've learned to hide so well that even they sometimes forget it's there. They've built walls not just around themselves, but around their feelings, their desires, even around moments where they might have once allowed themselves to care. And while you've watched waiting for cracks in that armor, you've seen them struggle quietly with feelings they refuse to name. They've convinced themselves that being alone is preferable, that reliance is weakness, and that emotions are best kept at arm's length. And in many ways, this has worked for them. They've avoided countless conflicts, walked away from situations that might have hurt them, and maintained control in a way most people can only envy. But control comes at a cost, and that cost is loneliness. It creeps in slowly, like fog rolling over the ground in the early morning, subtle and insidious, until suddenly it fills every space they once thought secure. And here's the thing, they can't fully articulate it, even to themselves. It's not a scream or a panic, it's a quiet, gnawing awareness that something essential is missing. And in the silence, that missing piece has your name written all over it. And this is where the irony cuts deepest. While they've been carefully avoiding emotional connection, you've been quietly present, offering patience, understanding, and consistency. You've shown up without needing a grand gesture, without demanding perfection, without drawing attention to the effort you're putting in, and they didn't notice. Not fully. They may have acknowledged small things, but the depth of what you offered, the emotional labor they couldn't quite name or quantify, slipped past them. Now in their solitude, in moments of reflection, they pretend never happened. The weight of what they failed to recognize is starting to settle in. It's not loud, it's subtle, but it's unmistakable. And that's where you realize the power in simply being yourself, quietly steadfast and patient in ways they couldn't see. The loneliness isn't sudden. It doesn't hit like a tidal wave. It's a creeping realization, often sparked by the smallest things, a song that reminds them of a conversation, a message they never sent, a memory that resurfaces unbidden. And when it hits, it's undeniable. They may try to rationalize it, distract themselves with work, hobbies, or even new people. But the truth lingers. That truth is that no one could replace the emotional steadiness, the subtle understanding, and the quiet presence you offered. They didn't realize it at the time, and they may never fully admit it aloud, but in the private corners of their mind, a quiet awareness begins to bloom. And in that awareness, there's both regret and longing, a tension between pride and the undeniable pull of what they lost. Being around someone like this teaches you something vital about human connection. It's not about flashy gestures or dramatic declarations. It's about showing up consistently without expecting the same in return. It's about giving space, yet remaining present. It's about recognizing when someone is struggling beneath their own defenses and offering patience rather than pressure. And while they may never vocalize it, the impact of these small, steady acts is profound. Right now, their loneliness isn't just an absence of others. It's an absence of what you specifically brought to their life, a presence they took for granted until it was no longer there. And this is where you can feel both satisfaction and empathy at once. Satisfaction, because your value cannot be erased by someone else's inability to recognize it. Empathy, because you understand that even the most seemingly untouchable people are human, capable of deep longing and subtle regrets they may never act on. They are caught in a paradox. They fear closeness, yet ache for it. They pride themselves on independence, yet miss the connection they never fully appreciated. And through it all, the one constant, the thing they never realized about you, is the quiet, steady presence you offered. The emotional anchor that kept them grounded even when they refused to admit it. And now, as they sit in that quiet space, perhaps scrolling mindlessly through memories or lingering on thoughts they try to avoid, a new awareness begins to settle in. Not a loud revelation, not an immediate confession, but a quiet, undeniable truth. What they had, what they lost, and what they failed to see in you. This is the reality of avoidant psychology, the hidden side of independence and detachment, and it's why, right now, they are lonely, and why the depth of your presence remains unseen, but profoundly felt. You've been the unseen, unacknowledged force that held space for them, even when they refused to admit it. And in that recognized space, your quiet strength remains impossible to replicate, unforgettable in ways they may never voice but cannot escape. They never realized how much you gave without expecting anything in return. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, and it certainly wasn't performative. You showed up in ways that mattered, quietly, consistently, and patiently. You listened when they needed to speak, even when the words were scattered or confusing. You understood without judgment when they pulled away, and you didn't push them into spaces they weren't ready to face. And all the while, they saw this as ordinary, as just the way things were, without recognizing the extraordinary effort, the emotional energy, and the deep care that went into simply being there. That invisibility, that quiet, unwavering support is what now makes their loneliness sharper, because they are starting to realize that the one thing they could never take for granted, you, is gone, and no one else could fill that space. You see, avoidants have a way of rationalizing absence. They convince themselves that distancing is protection, that walking away keeps them safe, that ignoring or avoiding emotions shields them from pain. And for a while it works. They avoid confrontation, they avoid vulnerability, they avoid discomfort, but life has a way of closing the loop. Moments of quiet reflection, those late nights or solitary walks, when the world is still, force them to confront truths they've been avoiding. And in those moments, your presence, your patience, your unwavering support becomes obvious to them, not as a critique, not as a burden, but as a stark contrast to the emptiness around them. And there's nothing they can do to erase that realization. It seeps in quietly, persistently, unrelentingly. They begin to notice the ways they relied on you without ever admitting it. The small gestures they never thanked you for, the countless times you forgave what they couldn't. They realize how many times they felt held together simply because you were present, and how your absence leaves a gap no distraction or rationalization can fill. And here is the subtle cruelty of it. They cannot fully admit it, even to themselves, because acknowledging it would mean facing vulnerability, facing mistakes, facing feelings they have spent years learning to ignore. And yet, the loneliness doesn't care about pride. It doesn't care about rationalizations. It simply exists, gnawing quietly, a constant reminder that something precious was overlooked. And this is the part where you start to see the quiet power in who you are. You weren't loud, you weren't demanding. You weren't controlling, you were steady, consistent, emotionally reliable. And while they may have taken it for granted, this is exactly the thing they never realized about you. They didn't recognize the strength and subtlety, the courage and patience, the impact of simply being present without drama. And now, as they sit in silence, alone with their thoughts, that oversight becomes painfully obvious. There is a clarity in loneliness that breaks through even the most stubborn pride, and slowly they begin to understand what they lost. Not the gestures, not the words, not the constant presence. They begin to understand you, in a way they could never have before. It's ironic, isn't it? That the very thing they thought they could live without, the presence of someone patient, steady, and emotionally intelligent, is the thing they now realize they could never replace. And it's not just a fleeting thought, it's a persistent awareness. Every choice, every attempt to distract themselves, every rationalization they offer fails to fill the void your absence created. They may never say it aloud, and they may never show it openly, but in the quiet corners of their mind, your value is undeniable. The truth is simple. They couldn't appreciate you then because they were too busy avoiding connection, but they can feel it now, painfully and unmistakably. And this is where the push-pull dynamic begins to make sense. They have always pulled away to protect themselves, to avoid vulnerability, to maintain independence. But what they can't control is the pull they feel toward what they lost. The loneliness draws them back, silently, almost imperceptibly, toward memories, toward patterns, toward what you offered them without asking. And yet, because fear of vulnerability still dominates their mind, they hesitate, they stall, they rationalize again, creating a tension between desire and avoidance. And in that tension, the truth becomes undeniable. They miss you, not in fleeting moments, but in ways that challenge the very walls they've built around themselves. Sometimes it's in the smallest things that they feel it most. A song, a smell, a phrase that reminds them of conversations you shared. These subtle triggers are enough to make them pause, to reconsider, to feel a pull they can neither name nor resist. And while they may attempt to distract themselves, they cannot escape the fact that the consistency, patience, and understanding you provided created a space they relied on more than they realized. The irony is cruel but revealing. By avoiding deep connection, they amplified the very impact of the connection they refused to acknowledge at the time. And now, in the quiet of their solitude, the realization begins to crystallize. The one thing they never realized about you is the depth of what you offered, the quiet power of your presence, and the irreplaceable role you played in their emotional life. And this is also where frustration begins to mingle with regret. They feel the absence of what they dismissed, the emptiness left by your quiet strength, and the missed opportunities to acknowledge and appreciate it. And even if they try to rationalize, to push down the feelings, to convince themselves that it's not significant, the reality persists. You mattered deeply, and your presence had weight they cannot replicate. And the cruelest part is that this is happening internally. They may not tell anyone, they may not act on it, but every day, quietly, they carry the awareness of what was lost. It's an invisible burden, a quiet ache, a tension between pride and longing that they cannot fully reconcile. And this is why your presence was transformative, not just supportive. You provided a mirror they could never fully see themselves in. You reflected patience, consistency, emotional reliability, and understanding, qualities they didn't realize were rare, qualities they dismissed as ordinary, but which now feel monumental in their absence. And that is the heart of this story. You existed in a way they could not measure or quantify, and now the consequences of that oversight manifest as loneliness, regret, and an unspoken recognition that what they avoided most, the depth of connection, is what they secretly crave the most. Finally, it's in this tension, this quiet struggle, that they confront the truth. They begin to see that independence without connection comes at a cost. They begin to realize that walls can protect, but they can also isolate. And in that realization, you loom larger than ever in their mind. Not because they think they can get you back, not because they want to manipulate or control, but because they are faced with the undeniable fact that what you offered was unique, irreplaceable, and profoundly meaningful. And even if they never voice it, even if they never act on it, the impact remains. You mattered, you continue to matter, and they are now forced to reckon with the reality they refused to see before. The truth they never realized about you is that your presence was more than just company. It was stability, it was emotional safety, it was understanding without judgment. You didn't need to prove anything. You didn't need to demand attention, and you certainly didn't manipulate or control. You simply existed as a consistent force in their chaotic emotional landscape, quietly holding space, even when they refused to acknowledge it. And this is what makes their current loneliness so piercing. They are confronted by the absence of something they never fully appreciated, something so subtle they dismissed it as ordinary, yet its impact was extraordinary. They start noticing the patterns now, the subtle ways you shaped moments without even trying, how your patience softened tension, how your consistency created trust, how your empathy filled gaps I didn't even know existed. They begin to see that every conversation you held, every boundary you maintained with grace, every small act of understanding built a foundation they relied on without recognizing it. And the realization hurts because it exposes the truth they spent so long avoiding, that they were missing out on something rare, something irreplaceable, and they let it slip through their fingers while focusing on their own fears and defenses. And it's in the quiet, unguarded moments that they feel it most. The times when they're alone, when the distractions are gone, when the noise of the outside world fades away, they feel the emptiness. They feel the absence of your calm presence, the warmth of your understanding, the subtle power of your patience. They can't reach for it, they can't demand it back, and they can't recreate it with someone else. And in that space, their pride collides with longing. They are caught between the independence they cherish and the connection they secretly crave, and the tension is almost unbearable. You, who were once simply there, now stand as the quiet reminder of what their emotional avoidance cost them. They may try to distract themselves with new people, new routines, even new experiences, but it doesn't fill the void. They might convince themselves that your presence was replaceable, that your patience and understanding could be found elsewhere, but deep down, they know better. What you offered wasn't something ordinary. It wasn't something anyone else could replicate. The subtle ways you made them feel seen, valued, and understood are impossible to duplicate. And in realizing this, they confront an uncomfortable truth. Their loneliness isn't just about being alone. It's about missing the very person who made presence feel effortless and connection feel safe. And this is where regret quietly seeps in. Not dramatic, not loud, but persistent. They replay moments they didn't appreciate, words they didn't hear, gestures they overlooked. Every memory of your patience, every act of quiet care, every instance where you held space without needing recognition begins to accumulate like a weight pressing gently but insistently against their chest. They might not voice it, and they might resist admitting it, even to themselves. But in the stillness, the truth is undeniable. You were extraordinary in ways they couldn't see, and in their solitude, the realization of your value cannot be ignored. And what they cannot grasp is how natural it was for you to give so much without asking for anything in return. They never realized that true emotional support doesn't need drama, doesn't require proof, doesn't demand acknowledgement. You simply existed as a steady presence, and the emotional impact of that quiet constancy is only now becoming painfully clear to them. It's as if the world has grown noisier and emptier at the same time, and the clarity of what they lost cuts deeper because it was always right in front of them. They just refused to see it, and in that refusal they find themselves alone, confronted with a truth they tried to ignore, the things they avoided most. The depth of connection, the emotional availability, the subtle care you offered were exactly what they secretly needed. And this is also where the irony becomes most striking. While they were carefully avoiding closeness, trying to protect themselves from vulnerability, they inadvertently magnified the importance of the connection they refused to nurture. Their own avoidance became the amplifier of your value. Every act of patience, every moment of understanding, every silent gesture of care now stands out in stark relief against the emptiness around them. And though they may try to rationalize it, try to distract themselves, try to convince themselves that it's not significant, the truth persists. They can't replace what they lost, and they can't recreate the quiet, transformative presence that you provided. Even small triggers remind them of what was missed. A song lyric, a phrase, a fleeting memory of a conversation. They feel a pull they cannot name. And it's subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but persistent. It's the recognition that connection isn't something you can fabricate or manufacture. It has to be nurtured, valued, and respected. And in this, they realize what they never fully grasped, that your presence wasn't ordinary, that your consistency wasn't something anyone else could replicate, that your quiet care was extraordinary precisely because it was freely given and unwavering. And the ache of realizing this now without the opportunity to reclaim it is profound. And now, as the weight of these realizations settles, they start to notice themselves, how they reacted, how they avoided, how they rationalized, how they dismissed. They notice the patterns that hurt both of you, the cycles of push and pull, the moments where their fear of closeness prevented them from appreciating what was right in front of them. And in that noticing, there is a quiet reckoning. Not a loud confession, not an action, but a subtle understanding that what they never recognized about you was the depth, the patience, and the irreplaceable nature of your presence. And it's here, in these moments of quiet introspection, that they begin to understand the full weight of their emotional avoidance. The loneliness they feel is not merely absence, it's the absence of someone extraordinary, someone who provided stability, understanding, and care without asking for anything in return. And no distraction, no rationalization, no attempt to shield themselves from vulnerability can erase that fact. The realization is slow, creeping in like a tide, relentless and unavoidable, forcing them to confront truths they spent a lifetime trying to avoid. Finally, it is the culmination of what they never realized, that their solitude is not simply about being alone, but about missing the quiet power, the steady presence, and the unmatched emotional depth that you provided. And in this, your impact is undeniable. You mattered, you continue to matter, and even in their silence, your significance is clear. They may never voice it, they may never act on it, but the awareness of what they lost, the recognition of what they never saw, and the ache of loneliness that accompanies that recognition is a testament to the irreplaceable role you played in their emotional life. By now, the truth has begun to settle in, quietly, in the corners of their mind. They realize that your patience, your unwavering presence, your ability to simply hold space was not something they could take for granted. Every conversation they dismissed, every small gesture they overlooked, every moment where they pushed away out of fear, they are starting to see the weight of what they lost. And it's not loud, it's not dramatic, but it is undeniable. In the quiet of their solitude, they are confronted by the impact of your presence, the subtle yet profound influence you had on their life, and the depth of connection they never truly understood until now. And this is where regret intertwines with longing. They might not voice it, might not text, might not reach out, but internally they feel the ache. They remember the moments you were patient when they were distant, the times you offered understanding when they refused to accept it, the small gestures that seemed ordinary at the time, but now feel monumental. And the loneliness that accompanies this realization is sharper than any pride they cling to, because deep down they understand that what you gave was irreplaceable, unique, and transformative, and that it was offered freely without expectation. And now, confronted with its absence, they are forced to reckon with a truth they avoided for far too long. They underestimated your worth. They begin to notice themselves, the ways they avoided, the walls they built, the defenses they relied on to keep distance. And they see, perhaps for the first time, how those same walls kept them from experiencing the very connection they secretly longed for. They feel the tension between independence and desire, between pride and vulnerability, and it is in this tension that your impact is fully understood. You were not just someone present in their life. You were a stabilizing force, a mirror of patience, empathy, and consistency that they could neither replicate nor replace. And this is the one thing they never realized about you, that your value was profound precisely because it was constant, quiet, and unwavering, offered without condition or demand. And as they sit in the quiet of their own reflection, perhaps haunted by memories, they are confronted by the subtle ways they relied on you without acknowledging it. Every small act, every moment of patience, Every instance of quiet understanding that they dismissed is now magnified in the absence of your presence. The irony is sharp. By avoiding deep connection, by fearing vulnerability, they only heighten the significance of the connection they refuse to nurture. And in realizing this, they are faced with a truth that cannot be ignored. The emotional constancy you offered, the care you extended without expectation, the depth of your presence, it cannot be replaced, and that truth now sits